Imagine standing in the middle of a vast desert with nothing around you but heat, glare, and sand. The land looks stripped down to almost nothing, as if life had abandoned it long ago. And yet beneath that stillness lies one of the greatest stores of energy on Earth. That is the real mystery here. Not simply that the Middle East has oil, but that a place so dry, harsh, and seemingly lifeless came to hold a substance born from ancient living things. How can a landscape that feels almost empty preserve the remains of vanished worlds below it? To answer that, we have to look past the desert we know and return to deep time, ancient seas, and the hidden architecture of rock far underground. Let's get into it right here on Secrets of Simple Things. Back when the desert was underwater, to understand why this region holds so much oil, we have to picture a Middle East that would feel almost impossible to recognize today. Between roughly 200 and 300 million years ago, much of it lay beneath warm, shallow seas. These waters were crowded with plankton, algae, and countless tiny marine organisms drifting, feeding, reproducing, and dying in huge numbers. When they died, they did not simply vanish. Their remains settled onto the seafloor, where layers built up over immense stretches of time. What looks like lifeless desert now was once a place of steady biological accumulation, quietly storing the raw material for something that would appear much later. Oil did not begin as a black liquid waiting underground. It began as tiny forms of life in an ancient sea. But dead organisms on the seabed do not turn into fuel on their own. Earth still had much more work to do. Oil does not begin as oil. Once those remains were buried, the deeper transformation began. More sediment kept arriving from above, pressing the organic layers farther down into the earth. With depth came pressure. With pressure came heat. But this was not a dramatic underground event that changed everything at once. It was a patient process of burial, compression, and chemical change unfolding in darkness over spans of time so long they barely fit human intuition. As the organic matter sank deeper, its structure slowly broke down and rearranged. Over millions of years, it became hydrocarbons, the compounds that make up oil and natural gas. Oil is not something the Earth simply stores. It is something the Earth cooks slowly, under conditions that have to last for ages. What begins as microscopic life becomes fuel only after time, weight, and heat have worked on it almost beyond imagination. But ancient marine life existed in many places. So why did the Middle East become such an extraordinary storehouse while many other regions did not? The rare part was not life but the conditions. That question matters because the unusual part of this story was not the existence of marine life. Ancient seas once covered large parts of the planet. What made the Middle East exceptional was the combination of conditions that followed. The region experienced long stretches of geological stability, which allowed sediments to pile up without heavy disruption. That steady burial mattered because organic material needed both time and depth to keep changing. The underground environment also remained within a narrow and favorable range. If it became too hot, the oil could be destroyed. If it stayed too cool, the transformation would never fully happen. Thick sedimentary sequences gave the process room to continue over immense spans of time, and some of the most favorable conditions arrived during key periods such as the Mesozoic era. The Middle East did not become oil-rich because of a single miracle. It became oil-rich because many different factors aligned and stayed aligned. Still, forming oil was only half the story. If nothing held it in place, it would never remain concentrated in giant fields. A hidden architecture under the ground. At this point, the world beneath the desert starts to look less like chaos and more like hidden architecture. Geologists often describe it in three parts. First comes the source rock, the layer where buried organic material was transformed into petroleum. But oil does not usually stay where it forms. It migrates. That is where reservoir rock matters. In the Middle East, these layers are often limestone or sandstone, porous rocks filled with tiny spaces that can hold fluids. Think of them like a sponge, not soft or visible from above, but full of room inside. Oil can move into those spaces and collect there in remarkable amounts. Then above, that sits the cap rock, a layer of impermeable stone that acts like a lid. Without it, the oil could keep moving upward and escape. With it, the oil stays sealed below. This is why petroleum in the region is not merely present, but concentrated. Beneath the sand is not a random underground mess. It is a precise natural arrangement built over deep time. But even a good storage system does not automatically create giant fields. The crust still needed a way to gather oil at scale. When the earth bends, oil gets trapped. That is where tectonic movement enters the story. The Middle East lies close to major plate boundaries, especially those involving the Arabian Plate. Over immense spans of time, slow collisions and pressures bent layers of rock upward into broad underground arches called anticlines. They matter because oil does not simply sit still once it forms. Being less dense than water, it tends to migrate upward through porous rock. If the layers arch in the right way and a sealing layer sits above them, the oil rises until it reaches the top of that fold and becomes trapped there. In effect, the earth builds a natural container for its own fuel. That is why anticlines are so important. They turn storage into concentration. Many of the Middle East's largest oil fields were found in exactly these structures, where source, migration, storage, sealing, and trapping all came together. By now, the picture is clearer. Ancient life, the right conditions, rocks that could hold oil, and folds that could trap it. But the region still had another advantage. It managed to keep what it had made. Some places formed oil. The Middle East kept it. That distinction matters more than it first appears. Forming oil is one thing, keeping it is another. Over Earth's history, many regions may have generated hydrocarbons from ancient organic material only to lose much of what they made. Tectonic activity can become too violent. Rock layers can crack. Faults can open escape routes. Erosion can strip away protective layers. Heat can rise beyond the range that preserves oil well. A region can do much of the work required to create petroleum and still fail to hold on to it over the long run. What made the Middle East unusual was not only that oil formed there, but that large amounts remained protected through vast stretches of geological time. The seals held, the traps persisted, the structures survived. That is the difference between a place that once had oil and a place that still contains giant fields today. Some regions formed petroleum but lost it. The Middle East formed it and preserved it, and across an enormous geological canvas, that difference becomes extraordinary. Scale changed everything. That scale is one of the biggest reasons the region matters so much. The Middle East's sedimentary basins are immense, spreading across vast areas and extending deep underground. This meant that the conditions favorable to oil formation were not local accidents confined to a few small spots. They stretched across broad connected systems, allowing petroleum to accumulate in reservoirs that were large, continuous, and often easier to exploit than reserves trapped in deeper or more complicated settings elsewhere. Nature did not simply create petroleum here. It created it on a scale large enough to shape modern industry and global energy dependence. Timing mattered too. Not every part of the world experienced the same favorable conditions at the same geological moment. Some places had organic material but lacked the right heat or pressure. Others formed oil but later lost it through tectonic disruption or erosion. The Middle East combined formation, trapping, preservation, and scale. Yet even within the region, this abundance is not spread evenly. Why some countries sit on far more oil than others. That is why countries such as Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates ended up with far more oil than their neighbors. They sit above the most favorable combinations of geology. In those places, the key elements lined up especially well: source rocks that generated petroleum, porous reservoir rocks that could store it, cap rocks that sealed it in, and structural traps that gathered it into major fields. The difference begins underground, long before economics or politics enter the picture, and that creates the final paradox of this story. A region now associated with heat, sand, and aridity was built on the buried memory of water and life. The desert is not the opposite of the sea. The Middle East did not become rich in oil by luck. Its reserves were shaped by ancient seas crowded with microscopic life, by burial over immense spans of time, by heat and pressure that stayed within the right range, by rocks that could store oil, by structures that could trap it, and by a geological history stable enough to preserve it. The ancient seas eventually receded, the climate grew drier, and the surface turned into the deserts we know today. But the desert did not erase what came before, it covered it. That is why this story feels larger than oil alone. It reveals how completely the present can hide the past. What looks barren on the surface can be the latest layer of a much older world beneath it. The desert is not the opposite of the sea, it is what came after. Beneath one of the most empty-looking landscapes on Earth lies the memory of a world that was once full of life. If this video changed the way you see the Middle East, then it did more than explain oil. It revealed how a landscape that looks empty can carry the buried memory of an entirely different world. Beneath the desert was once a sea, and beneath what seems simple, there is often a much deeper story waiting to be uncovered. If you enjoy looking at ordinary things until they reveal something much larger, subscribe to Secrets of Simple Things for more stories hidden beneath the surface.